I recently finished the first DLC pack for 2018 Spider-Man entitled The Heist. In it, Peter Parker has to deal with cat burglar Felicia Day, aka Black Cat. The DLC was fine. It was more story missions that followed the same formula of the main game, and more side busy work in the form of collectibles and crimes. But one thing in particular stood out to me and made me realize how incredibly lazy AAA game storytelling can feel sometimes. See, at the end of the main game, Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson have rekindled their relationship and are working through their issues.
I never stopped wanting to.
Me neither.
Aww. But then Felicia shows up in the first DLC.
I like watching you. Reminds me of old times.
And it's explained that she and Peter were romantically involved for a while many years ago. Felicia immediately starts flirting with Peter at every chance she gets, to no protest from Peter, despite being in a relationship with MJ.
Felicia, we need to talk.
Oh, I do miss our little chats.
This love triangle carries out throughout the rest of the DLC, and all of the familiar story beats reminded me of many games I've played before.
Peter, is everything okay?
Sorry, MJ, I just ran into an old friend.
Who?
Trouble.
This is known as the Betty and Veronica trope, named for the famous love triangle in the Archie comics. Described on tvtropes.com as a dynamic, quote, wherein the main character, Archie, is caught between two love interests with drastically different personalities. Betty is the sweet, reliable, everyday girl next door type, which can often mean kind of dull, while Veronica is more alluring, exotic, and edgy, but has a more mischievous or icy personality. Peter is our Archie, the run-of-the-mill dopey white boy caught between MJ, the Betty, or good girl, who Peter would want to take home to Aunt May, rest in peace, and Felicia, the Veronica, our bad girl who makes sexual innuendos and wraps her latex legs around Peter any chance she gets. It's something that I was able to identify immediately as something I've seen many times before, especially in AAA games. I was able to come up with over a dozen games I've played personally over the years that employed the Betty and Veronica trope. Persona 4's Chie and Yukiko, Far Cry 3's Lisa and Citra, Uncharted 2's Elena and Chloe, Infamous 2's Quo and Nyx, Catherine's, The Witcher 3's Yennefer and Triss, Mass Effect's Liara and Ashley, and Miranda and Kelly, and Hallie and Jack, Fire Emblem Fates, Felicia and Azura, Twilight Princess's Zelda and Midna, GTA 4's Kate and Michelle, Resident Evil 2's Claire and Ada, Persona 5's Fatuba and Anne, and the list goes on and on. Now, it's important to say that there's nothing inherently wrong with using a trope. People often hear something described as tropey and interpret that as a criticism. A trope is just another way of identifying a convention, a way of doing things often in literary or creative mediums, such as films, books, and video games. Tropes can be intentional, a tool to help creators control the audience's expectation, or they can be unintentional, a subconscious regurgitation of a trope that a creator has seen in other medium. And when this regurgitation comes at the cost of anything new or interesting, that work suffers, as I found with Spider-Man's first DLC story. It was dull and eye-roll inducing, and I really wanted something more, anything to get me invested in this story. The other thing about the Betty and Veronica trope when it comes to video games is that because games are an interactive medium, they put you directly into the role of our Archie, Peter Parker. When you die in Spider-Man, you don't say, "Aw man, Peter died." You say, "Aw man, I died." The player is supposed to feel like Spider-Man. So when the game presents players with the dilemma of these two conventionally attractive women vying for your attention, it becomes a heteronormative power fantasy, played out to entertain the presumed straight male player, like me. That's the issue I see with this trope, in addition to it being just some incredibly lazy writing. It serves to reinforce a problematic power dynamic that can warp a player's worldview. A lot of these scenes with Black Cat felt like they were supposed to be enticing eye candy for the player, and who would a sexy latex-wearing woman try to appeal to besides straight guys, who game developers have catered to for decades. Maybe some gay gals, but I wouldn't bet on it. The other thing that bothered me was Peter never tells Black Cat to stop what she's doing because he's with MJ, which felt very out of character after how much he fought to win MJ back in the main game. I think this decision also served to fulfill that fantasy for players. It would really kill the mood if Peter was like, "Hey, please don't sexually harass me, I have a girlfriend." So at the expense of his character development, it plays out. Now, Spider-Man has a set story. Peter ultimately makes an unchangeable decision regardless of player input, but in a lot of other games I mentioned, these women are prizes to be claimed if you can just pick the right dialogue lines or complete the right side missions. And then you, the player, can get with whoever you want to watch a janky, awkward sex scene for. In high school, my dad actually walked into the living room while this was happening. Sorry, Dad. The Betty and Veronica trope in these situations isn't the end of the world. And obviously it's way easier to critique than to create. I'd just personally like to see more interesting relationships between characters in the games I play. Things that subvert my expectations and push the envelope for what we can get from our games. There's lots of little examples of this, like in Sly Cooper 3, one of my favorite games. Penelope gets caught between two male characters in Sly and Bentley. Her character ultimately has to decide who she wants to be with. And to Mass Effect's credit, it gives you the option to play through the entire trilogy as female Shepard, with all of the same romance options available to the player. There's some standout games like Firewatch, which develops a sort of love triangle between Henry, his wife, and Delilah. It takes that formula and runs in a whole new direction with it. Henry is struggling with his wife's dementia, grappling with the love of his life barely remembering him anymore, so he takes a break to be a forest fire lookout where he meets Delilah, another lookout who he really hits it off with. Firewatch gave me real conversations with real characters, who didn't feel like two-dimensional facsimiles of characters I've seen in every other game. I was having real conversations with complicated characters who had depth to them.
I don't talk to the other lookouts as much as I talk to you. Not in the same way. And I know you're not really available, but I want you to know, well, maybe it'd be nice to get together at the end of the summer. Look, we don't have to plan or even talk about it. I'm just having the thought. I wish I was over there.
I wish you were too.
Hell, even Archie mixed up its own trope, cutting out Archie and having Betty and Veronica get married. There's loads of room to be more interesting when it comes to writing characters into our games, and I really hope AAA games will move that way sooner rather than later. Romance, sex, love, and intimacy are all themes I would love to see get more explored in interesting and thoughtful ways in our video games, AAA especially. So here's hoping Spider-Man 2 will have more to offer when it comes to Peter and MJ's relationship, which had some genuinely touching moments in the main game.
Please say no, please say no.
I love this scene.
Okay. And not okay. What is there to figure out?
Why'd they have to botch the DLC?